Ashlee Gadd in the house, in the sisterhood house. Welcome.
Thank you, friend. Thanks for having me. You just made me sound so much cooler than I really am. I really appreciate that intro.
We always try to make ourselves sound cooler. So
Yeah, I feel like an athlete or something, and I'm so not an athlete. So I really appreciate that.
Well, 2023, and we're going to get creative this year, Ashlee. We are committed to getting creative. And you are someone who is so good at practicing this in real life. And yet you are someone who doesn't have margin to do this. And yet you somehow find it. Tell us a little bit about just how you came to the place where you valued creativity.
Yeah, I think I've always valued creativity. I've always been a really creative person, but motherhood definitely brought with it sort of a reckoning of sorts, I guess you could say, with my creative efforts and my creative dreams and my creative pursuits, just trying to figure out kind of how to create in the midst of motherhood with shrinking time, or what felt like shrinking time, and sleepless nights, and just all the new motherhood things bubbling up, taking up space in my brain. And so I think, I've been a mom for a decade now, and over the past 10 years, I've really come to value and appreciate what creativity does for me, not just as a human, but also as a mom. And so it's really important to me. And I'm so excited that I get to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, even you just saying that brought to mind a workshop I went to once at a writing conference. It was with Trisha Goyer. Do you know who she is? She's written a lot of books. Anyway, and it was titled How Mothering Impacts Your Writing. And she kind of took it from two angles. She said, writing makes us better moms, and being a mom makes us a better writer. And she talked about each of the reasons. And so as you're talking about how motherhood intersected with your creative life, I love the message that it makes you a better mom, a better woman.
Yeah.
And we do tend to compartmentalize, would you say?
I think I tried to do that so hard when I was a new mom, okay, I'm going to have motherhood in this box, and I'm going to have creativity in this box, and I'm not going to let them touch one another, because I don't know, it's almost as if I believed like every minute that I spent mothering was taking something away from my creativity, and every minute I spent on my creativity was taking something away from my motherhood. And it was like this math that I couldn't make add up. And so I have like really learned I love that about the writing. And I've said the same thing about creativity. Like the more I've really allowed the two of those things to collide, motherhood and creativity, the more I've been able to embrace the idea that motherhood really inspires my creativity, and creativity really inspires my motherhood. And when we allow them to just intersect and collide into this like beautiful mess, there's something really powerful and profound about that.
Oh my gosh. I love the direction of this so much. And I'm thinking about just in this series, The Healthy Way, we're trying to promote health. We're rebooting, as we do every new year with the best of intentions. We're rebooting this idea of what makes the healthiest version of us. And so how is creativity connected to health in all ways, regardless of the avenue that we choose, whether that's maybe it's crafting, maybe the creativity is on a canvas, maybe it's through writing, maybe it's through how you decorate your home or serve your neighbors. I mean, there's could be a lot of ways that we're creative. Yeah. How is that connected to our health?
I think, in the broadest sense, creativity is really part of what it means to be a human. And so for me, I see creativity threaded through what it means to have a body and a heart and a mind and a soul. My creativity touches like every aspect of that in a very holistic sense. And so I think when we do what you're saying, Krista, when we put ourselves out there and we write and we bake and we dance and we sing and we garden and we do all of these creative things that light us up on the inside, we're really practicing what it means to be a whole flourishing person made in the image of a really creative God.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm thinking through right now as you're saying that. And so what happens to us then? What, I guess on the flip side of that coin,
Mm-hmm.
what happens to us when we're all work, all digital,
Mm-hmm.
and we become less creative because and I'm obviously, like, when you're writing, you're using a computer. Like, digital does not mean not creative.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying? When we're just kind of caught in this routine life where there may not be a lot of creativity infused, what happens to us then?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think one of the first things that happens is we lose our sense of curiosity, and
Mm.
we lose our imagination and our ability to wonder. Those are sort of the words that are coming to mind with that, of like, I can see all of those things shriveling up in a life that isn't making any space for creativity.
So what do you think when you look at moms and women in general? A lot of our listeners are moms of older kids. So
Mhm.
maybe they spent a decade or two
Mhm.
putting their creativity on hold.
Yeah.
What are the barriers that you see as you've talked to other women about not being creative or not taking that leap and saying, I'm going to get back into it?
Yeah. It's interesting because I think in my sort of the demographic that I probably speak a little bit more to, it's the mothers of young children, the season of children just climbing all over you, spit up down your bra, like that type of situation where
Yep.
there's like the physical barrier. There's physical distractions. We're so busy. There's mental barriers there too. And I experience that a lot. But I imagine as your children get older and those physical barriers maybe start to soften a little bit, and you actually have more tangible physical time and space to create, I imagine that getting over that mental hurdle becomes a lot more difficult, especially in the sense that I do think a lot of women struggle with simply giving themselves permission to pursue their creative endeavors because they tend to believe that it's maybe selfish,
Mhm.
or especially if they're not, earning an income through those endeavors, or, it's hard to make space for something that the world maybe doesn't value as much as it values the ability to make money or even garner attention or applause. Our
Mhm.
nation blesses a lot of different types of efforts, but I think finding value in that internal purpose and the internal value of creativity, I think that might be really difficult for a mom who has put it on the shelf for so long to come back from that space and to re-engage in that permission that they maybe haven't given themselves for a decade. I imagine that would be really, really difficult. I don't have
I
older
think,
kids,
Yeah.
so I'm sort of speculating here.
no,
Yeah. I think
think that's
you're right
good.
on. Yeah.
And I do think COVID gave permission and the
Mhm.
time for people to dive back in. So,
Yeah.
like the bread baking
Mhm.
Totally.
right? I mean,
I did not get on that train, and I kind of regret it because I have a few friends now who are like expert sourdough makers, and I wish that I would have picked up that skill during COVID.
okay,
Because
the sourdough train
it's a
is
whole
a
thing.
thing. I
Yeah.
mean, it is. It's a whole thing. And I think what was good about it is that people could do it and they could do it imperfectly, and that's okay. And I
Mhm.
do
Yeah.
wonder if that's one of the barriers is we think,
Mm,
well, I'm not good at that, so why
mm,
even try it? Or
yeah.
I'm not proficient at that. So to take time for that is a waste because I'm not going to paint a painting that I'd want to put up in my home. So that's kind of silly to take all that time for that, right? We have
Mhm.
these weird mind games, it
Mhm.
seems, that we play about why we shouldn't pick up a
Mhm.
creative pursuit. So I do think COVID was good for us in that. How do we overcome that mental barrier
Mhm.
of maybe I'm not good at this, or I should have
Mhm.
done this 10 years ago? For
Mhm.
example, let me use myself as an example. So, like guitar, I picked up guitar in college. I started playing it, but then I really shelved it for parenting years. And so a part of me thinks, well, if you wanted to learn guitar, you should have done that, 10, 20 years ago. Now it's too late. How do we overcome that mental barrier?
Yeah. No, I am totally identifying with all of this. Keep going. Yeah.
Alex, do you also have a creative gift that you put on the shelf for a decade? I would like to
Well,
know.
I think Krista spoke to the perfectionism a little bit. Like, I don't want to try it unless I'm going to be really good at it.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the value of the process versus the product. So I do want to hear you talk about that. But first answer Krista's question, because I interrupted about just
mental barriers.
How do we move past the mental barriers? I mean, I wish I had a magic 3-point step answer for this question, or just a magic vitamin you could order on Amazon to get over it, because that would just be so much easier than the real truth of it, which is, I mean, not to just shamelessly plug my book here, but my answer truly is you just create anyway. You just do it anyway. I struggle with perfectionism every single time I sit down to a blank page. I have not grown out of that. I've been writing pretty much my whole life. I'm 36 years old, and that is still something that I struggle with in a really, really profound way, to be honest. I struggle with fear. I struggle with doubt. I struggle with imposter syndrome. I struggle with just reminding myself over and over again that I don't have to have a scarcity mentality when I sit down to make art. And those things sort of, in my experience, it's not really something that we overcome. I think that if we do overcome it at some point, I'm not there in my life, so I can't speak to that. But what I've learned is almost to just kind of befriend that part of the process. I know it's coming. And so we just have to sort of ride the wave and move all the way through it. I always get to the other side, it's, I'm still creating. I still sit down and open up a blank document almost every day. I write almost every day, and I struggle with these things almost every day. And so my answer, as cliche as it is to just create anyway.
Yeah, because the perfectionism's going to stay if you let it be the dominant voice. It's going to continue to be the barrier that keeps you. And really, it's about the process of being creative. And so, I mean, one thing that I do sometimes is with writing, I tell myself, nobody's ever going to read this. Like, I just, from the get-go, I say, this is not just a first draft or a draft for something that's going public. This is a never going to be seen draft. And I wonder if with other creative pursuits, we can have that same idea. Like, I'm just going to paint this painting and no one's ever going to see it but God. And it's because of the process. I want to be part of using my hands to make something tactile that only I can do, that uniquely reflects how I'm feeling right now.
And that really just goes back to that internal reward. There is an internal reward in creating things and making art. And I think the more you do it, the more you create, the more you make things, the more you experience that personal fulfillment and all of the other good things that come about as a product of making something and embracing the process. Like you're saying, Alex, I think that when you know what's waiting for you on the other side, it makes going through the hurdles worth it. And so if you never give yourself the opportunity to get to the other side, you don't actually know how good it is to get there. Does that make sense? I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah, makes total sense.
And it reminds me, actually in the healthy way, we've had digital experts on talking about what's the antidote to that, to this like constant digital input. And it really is embodied activities that we have to remember that we are embodied creatures in a physical world. And we have to make time for those embodied activities that put us in that state of flow, that put us in that state of creating, that actually in our brains, we we neurologically need to do that for our brain health.
Mhm.
And that's even that why of remembering that is so helpful for me
Yeah.
as I think about just the why of doing embodied activities, because I want that gray matter in my brain
Mhm.
to not atrophy and die.
Mhm.
So that's
Right.
helpful, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So Ashlee, what would you say as even I love Create Anyway as a title. Like, oh, I love that so much because it's that whole thing of like something is better than nothing, and
Mhm.
which is a life mantra I have, and that whole idea that create anyway, regardless of fill in the blank.
Mhm.
And so tell us more about just what are some avenues that we can explore if people just aren't in touch with, I have no idea where I start
Mm.
with creativity.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's truly a million different ways to be creative. And it's funny, this is a random story I was not planning to share, but it's coming to the forefront of my mind. So I'm just gonna say it. I recently went to the eye doctor to get my eyes checked. I was well overdue for an eye appointment. And I have a new eye doctor who bought the practice of the woman that I used to see. And he gets me in there, and they have this really new fancy machine. It costs $35 to get this like extra crazy scan of your eye. And I'm like, okay, sure, $35. I guess this is important to you. So it's important to me. I don't know anything about optometry. I'm going to trust you. So he pulls me in there and he takes the scan. And gosh, you guys, I wish I could explain how this man's face lit up, showing me these like high scans of my actual eyeball. It was, and
Mhm.
on the screen, it just looks like an alien to me. I mean, it's just a blob, with all these lines in it. And he's showing me, it's like he's dissecting a canvas. I felt like all of a sudden
Mhm.
I was transported to an art gallery,
Yeah.
and this man is explaining to me up close on this huge screen all the inner workings of my eyeball. And it was so hilarious to just look at this man's enthusiasm for it. Like he could
Mhm.
not wait to tell me all about this machine and how it worked and the scans and what they mean. And I walked out of there thinking like that man is doing his life's work,
Yeah.
like that. And that is a form we don't typically think of, maybe like science or medical things as being creative, but I was astounded at this man's creative enthusiasm for this
Mhm.
scan, what he was able to show me about it. And I think for each and every one of us, there's something like that inside of us, I don't know what it is. It could be writing, it could be gardening, it could be painting. Or I have a friend who makes really cool metal wall hangings, and she just hammers them out in her backyard and puts them together, and they're absolutely stunning. We all are drawn, I think, to certain skill sets, certain materials, certain creative gifts that God has like given us a passion and a desire for. And so if you don't know what those things are, I think a really great place to start is just through maybe doing some journaling about it, and really just like paying attention, I think, to the little sparks that you experience throughout a day. I mean, I think that all of us know what it's like to kind of walk through the world and feel a little spark or a little inkling or a little desire toward something, toward making something, toward creating something. And I think journaling through maybe paying attention to those things would be a really good place to start.
Mhm. So
But
good. And I think like you were saying about the about the optometrist, we don't sometimes think we're being creative when we
mhm,
are. And so in some ways it's having an awareness and an acknowledgement of that too. Like
Mhm.
even last night, my husband was trying to come up with something creative to do with their office. And I'm
mhm,
like, oh, okay, let's sit down. And I'm like, I'm putting my full energy into this. Like you have my full attention right now. And the whole idea, because The Power of Moments, my favorite book of all time, it's not about the elaborate nature of what you're doing. It's how you infuse these
mhm,
really essential elements to make it special. Well, that little sesh that we had was actually very creative, right? Because we're trying to come up with something that is not just your average, like bring in this for the lunch and do this for the office, whatever. We're trying to make it different. We're trying to make it an element of surprise. We're trying to make it like a moment for the staff. And that is a creative pursuit that we were engaging in together, which, some of it is just acknowledging that and saying, yeah, this is like us practicing creativity together, which is the question I have for you. How do we grab others? And so like, that was just with my husband spontaneously, but how do we grab others to do or to encourage creativity in us?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm such a big proponent of creating in community and creating through collaboration. And I think that for a lot of people, that doesn't necessarily come natural to us. I'm thinking of my 3-year-old daughter who is obsessed with doing everything all by herself. This is like a quote that I hear multiple times a day, I do it myself. And she wants to brush her teeth by herself. She wants to get dressed by herself. And, it starts so young, this like hunger for independence. And I think a lot of us have a really hard time breaking that desire in us to do everything alone. So many of us enter motherhood that way, right? Like, well, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out by myself. And a lot of us enter art that way too, of I'm just going to sit at home and Google and trial and error until I master this all by myself because I want to be independent. But there's something so beautiful and so powerful about letting your guard down and letting other people into that messy process with you. I formed a mastermind group actually at the very beginning of 2020. This was like before we knew COVID was coming, before kind of the whole world sort of fell apart. And it has been, I'm not exaggerating when I say that was a life-changing moment for me, forming this mastermind group with 3 of my friends who we now talk every single day. We started out wanting to hold each other accountable in our creative goals, but a really cool thing happened shortly kind of into us having this mastermind together. We kind of realized and reassessed sort of what the point of our group was early on. Like we kind of started out as more of like a goal accountability group. And we very early on kind of shifted into more of a, we just want to be better writers. We all want to grow in our craft. We want to be better writers. And so at that moment, we started shifting away from just meeting every month to talk about our goals. And we started sending each other our writing and getting critiqued on it. So we would offer each other peer edits every month on 2 pieces of writing. And let me tell you what is a really humbling act. It is sending your crappy first drafts to your friends. And there was I remember just like a pivotal moment with my mastermind group. And these women quickly had become, my closest friends. And there was still this little tiny part of me that wanted to really polish up my writing before I sent it to them. I was still holding back a little bit. I still felt like I couldn't really be my full self, or I couldn't really show them the worst of my creativity, the worst of my writing. And I was working on, it was probably a chapter of my book. I don't remember exactly what it was now, but I was working on a piece of writing and I was stuck. Just every day I worked on this piece. Every day I hated it more and more. I was like wanting to just chuck my laptop in the river. I was just distraught over this piece of writing that was going nowhere. And my sweet little mastermind group just, hopped on Voxer and they're like, Ashlee, just send it to us, just send it to us as it is. Even if it's not done, even if it's terrible, like just send it to us as is. And you guys, like, I couldn't fathom sending them this draft. Even though they were my closest friends. We go back to that perfectionism problem, right? Like this is me, perfectionist 101. I couldn't fathom letting my closest friends see that draft. And yet when I finally surrendered and let it go and sent it to them, they instantly made it better. They didn't judge me. They weren't making fun of me. Whatever kind of fears I had crafted in my mind of like what was going to happen. I mean, what was going to happen? These are my friends, you know, like I was completely safe to send them my terrible, terrible writing. And yet I still held back. And now looking back, like I'm just so grateful that I was able to get over that hump, because let me tell you, I have sent them many a terrible draft since then. And again, I am only better for it. These women have stretched me and grown me and helped me revise my work and edit my writing. And I'm so grateful for their efforts and the way that they champion and cheer me on and have really just let me be my full self and let my art be that full self with them.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to before when you were talking about how do you get started if you feel stuck and you don't know. So if you're in that place, you might think, well, I can't invite a group of people into this because I don't even know what I'm inviting them into. I don't even know what I want out of this, but they might want that too. And I was remembering that for me, sometimes creativity is about noticing where I see beauty and where I experience wonder. Yeah. And so if I go in with those two things, then I start to be attracted to certain things. Like maybe I want to plant some flowers in a flower pot. I'm really bad at that. And I don't know where even like what goes in the shade and what goes in the sun, but my mom helps me with that. But that's where other people, I think, can maybe even help you see those things if you feel stuck and say, I don't know where I see beauty and I don't know where I experience wonder. If they know you well, they might be able to say, you're always talking about this, or you always stop and notice this at my house and I never pay attention to that, or with my kids or whatever. So they can even help you in the very beginning process, but you have to let them in. And that's what I'm hearing you say. It doesn't work if it's overly guarded. Now, maybe naturally it's going to be a little bit guarded because we're human and we're going to carry that with us and we're going to do it anyway, as you would say, and push through it. But if it's overly guarded, we're never going to get to that point, probably, where we allow people to help us.
Yeah. I mean, it's like so many aspects of life. You know, we're not meant to do life alone. We're not meant to do motherhood alone. We're not meant to do art alone. And I think that a lot of us have this idea of this like tortured lone artist in our head, you know, this guy like hunched over his screenplay in the basement, or, you know, this writer in a cabin in the woods. It's like we have these pictures in our head of like what it means to be an artist. But really, in my experience, like every good thing I've ever made has the fingerprints of other women on it. Wow. And that's what makes it good, you know? And I wish more women would really just fully lean into that. Because it is so much sweeter on this side.
My gosh, that is such a good word. Have either of you heard of the tarantula experiment?
No, I'm terrified to learn more about this.
Well, okay. This is getting to something that I think is really important. It's a psychological experiment, and it basically takes this group and it exposes them to tarantulas, and they're all afraid of tarantulas to varying degrees. And so first they just put the tarantula on the floor and they let the people like 10 feet away, and they let people watch the tarantula. And then, you know, the next step is they get 5 feet away. And I'm probably not even saying this exactly right, but basically the idea is within 2 hours, they have a tarantula on their hand. Okay. These are people that are fearful of tarantulas, but by doing these small steps toward the tarantula, they're able then within 2 hours to finally have the tarantula literally crawling on their hand, which gets to the idea of exposure. And it gets the idea of how we overcome fear. How do we overcome fear? By taking one small step toward that thing that we're afraid of. And so I was thinking of the tarantula experiment, Ashlee, when you were talking about sharing that chapter with your mastermind group, that in taking that step, that level of exposure allowed you then to take a next level of exposure. And so now you just send them, I mean, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like now you more easily send them things, but that was kind of your first step. And so when we look at this idea of fear, how we overcome that, whether it's starting something or whether it's sharing our art with someone else and trying to be a part of a community like you have, I think the tarantula experiment could be really helpful to think about.
Yeah.
And how we overcome those barriers.
I love that, Krista, so much. I distinctly remember, and I wrote a chapter about this in my book about how it takes a village to make art. And I told this story about my mastermind and sending them the chapter. And I seriously felt like when they had first suggested that they were asking me to do something so unreasonable. And exposure is the word of the day, because I distinctly remember feeling like they were asking me to like show up naked at a party. It just felt so like, you cannot see this. You don't understand. No one wants to see this. You know, I felt so exposed, and it was such a test of our friendship. And it was a test of my own willingness to be vulnerable. And once I did it was the test, you know, and once I was able to push past that, it did get easier every time. I'm not going to lie and tell you that I love sending my crappy first drafts even now, but I'm comfortable doing it. I'm comfortable sending my drafts, even though I don't super, super love doing that still. But yeah, there's something to be said for that. I still don't want a tarantula on my hand though, like ever.
Right. Well, you need to go and be in the experiment, Ashlee, within 2 hours. No, but I just think we often most of the time we run away from our fears because it's so uncomfortable. But I think instead asking that question of what is just one small way I could move toward my fear? And maybe it's not, you know, sending the whole first draft or chapter. Maybe for someone else, it would be sending a paragraph or I don't know, whatever. Right. But how in these small incremental acts. So good. Well, Ashlee, as we wrap up today, what would you say if you had to, you know, just give busy women 3 things they could do to add creativity to their days? What would they be?
Okay, so my first one, even if you're not a writer, and this is a tip straight from Julia Cameron, so I have to give her all the credit, but Julia Cameron talks about the importance of doing morning pages, which is writing. She proposes longhand 3 pages of stream of consciousness thoughts every morning. I will confess I do mine on the computer because I'm a wimp and my hand hurts if I write too long. But I think even if you're not a writer, and going back to what Alex was talking about with the, you know, no one's ever going to see this, morning pages are, no one's ever going to see it. I have pages and pages and pages and pages on my computer. My husband has been instructed to burn them all down if anything ever happens to me. They are just my deepest first thoughts, first thing in the morning. And I have been shocked time and time again at what has come out of that practice. I have discovered passions I didn't know I had. I've discovered dreams I didn't know that I wanted to pursue. I have discovered just weird stories and memories that I had completely forgotten about that just popped up. A couple mornings ago, I wrote a couple paragraphs about this mood ring that I had when I was a kid. Still to this day, like, I don't know what prompted that in me. I don't know where it came from. But I thought of it. And so I wrote about it. And I don't know if I will use that someday in another story, or if that was just a fun creative exercise to remember what it was like to be 9 years old and have a mood ring. But I very much enjoyed the process. So I think that's just a great exercise for anybody who wants to harness their creative energy. For me, I love writing first thing in the morning before the world gets into my head. And so I really can't recommend that enough. Okay, my second tip is to create when your kids are creating. And I know it's really tempting, especially for moms in my season of life, to, you know, anytime the kids are occupied, that's when we fold the laundry. That's when we make a meal. That's when we do the dishes. That's when we open the mail. But there is something so sweet and special about sitting down at the dining room table with your kids while they are coloring or making something, building Legos, whatever, and working on your own project. Like creating alongside my children has been a joy that I haven't always pursued, but in recent years, I've been trying more and more to really embrace that time together. And I've had really cool conversations with my kids about making art while we're both sitting down making art at the same time. And I really do think it's important, especially for moms, to model creativity for their kids. And it's really important to me for my kids to see me creating. And so that's just a great time and a great opportunity to do that, is to do it right there in front of your kids while they're making something too.
So good.
And then my last, this is more of like a mantra than anything else, but one of my favorite creative mantras is to go where the energy is. And so, one day you might wake up and wander into your kitchen and just really want to bake a cake. Or one day you might wake up and have a poem swirling in your head. Or one afternoon you might just get a sudden urge to plant flowers, like Alex had mentioned. And I just think it's so important to kind of like act on those desires when they come. And so I am notorious for, especially as a writer, for like putting down a piece of writing and shifting to something else if I have energy for another story. I just did this last week. I woke up in the morning and I was working on a different piece that actually had a deadline, but I had this story in my head from something that had happened the day before that I really didn't want to forget. And I had just like a lot of energy for it. And so I put down the deadline piece and I cranked out 1,200 words of this other story that it was like burning a hole in my heart and I had to get it out of my head. And so I think that's such a great way to keep creative momentum, is to just really act on that energy when it comes to you.
Those are really helpful. And I'm just thinking as you're talking, the more we do it, the better we get, the more comfortable we become. I mean, all those things, we just have to do it. Create anyway.
Create anyway. It's like a muscle. Yeah. It can only get stronger.
It's so good. Okay, Ashlee, I'm going to ask you a question. You did this exercise with us up at our retreat, which was so amazing. And you read the most beautiful piece that you wrote, and it was all about things you love.
Yes.
Remember that?
I do remember that. Yes.
I'm wondering, in the show notes today, could we put that piece in there, and then could we have that prompt for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to clarify really quick that I got this prompt from someone else. So I will also credit the original source for that prompt. So no one thinks that it was my idea originally, because
yes, but your words are yours, and they're absolutely
my list
beautiful.
Was mine.
Your list is yours. It's absolutely beautiful. And I think it's just such a great way, a great place for people to start if they just want to practice. Okay, I can think of things I love, but the way you do it is really beautiful. So anyway, we'll put that in the show notes, and that can maybe be a prompt to get people started.
Great. I love that idea.
And then also there's some writing prompts that our friend Katie Blackburn has that I can also put in the show notes. And then you also have a free download on your website, right?
I do. Yes. I'll give you the link to that as well.
And tell us the title of that.
It's what is the title of that? I think it's 5 creative sparks to pull you out of a rut. Something like that. I don't think that's exactly what it is, but something similar.
And the I love practice is part of that.
Yes.
Right?
The I love prompt is part of that. Yeah.
But all 5 of them are so good. So we will also link to that in the show notes, because that is a great download for people. All right, Ashlee. Well, your book is amazing. We are so excited for it to go into the world and to impact people, because it's going to have such great impact.
Thank you, friend. Thank you so much for having me on today. You both are just so supportive and encouraging, and I adore you both.
Well, right back at you. We feel the exact same. Happy New Year, Ashlee.
Happy New Year.
Bye.